You know, usually when we think about a relationship ending, we frame it as a failure.
Right, like somebody messed up somewhere along the line.
Exactly. We think somebody stopped trying. Or, maybe you just fundamentally chose the wrong person. It's binary. It's clean.
And in a weird way, it's kind of comforting.
Yeah. Because it implies that there was this distinct, identifiable problem. Like, if you had just worked harder or communicated better, you could have fixed it.
It plays right into this modern illusion of total control. I mean, we desperately want to believe that if we just go to enough couples therapy,
Or read enough self-help books.
totally. We
Yeah.
think the system will just operate flawlessly.
Yeah.
We treat love as this purely conscious, rational choice. Like
Correct.
we're entirely in the driver's seat.
But then you start pulling on the threads of evolutionary biology, and that comforting little illusion just completely unravels.
Oh, it falls apart instantly.
Because you realize we are operating in a landscape driven by ancient, deeply embedded programming. And that programming, it doesn't care about our romantic ideals at all.
Not even a little bit.
So I have a question for you, and for you listening. What if the reason so many relationships fail, particularly around that infamous 7-year mark, isn't because you changed the wrong person?
Right.
What if it's because your biology successfully completed its mission and is now actively trying to fire them?
It's an incredibly jarring thought, isn't it? I mean, it requires an absolute paradigm shift.
It really does. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today we're talking directly to you, the relationship strategist.
And by that, we mean whether you're a professional trying to understand human dynamics or just, deeply curious person.
Yeah, just someone trying to navigate the absolute minefield of modern dating and marriage. Our mission today is to decode this hidden million-year-old evolutionary programming.
The programming that's actively, quietly sabotaging modern relationships.
Exactly. And much more importantly, we are going to look at the strategic framework required to outsmart it.
And the material we're synthesizing today is just phenomenal. It bridges some wildly different disciplines.
We've got a lot to cover. We are taking the cold, hard observations of evolutionary biology and marrying them with psychological behavioral science, like the work of Daniel Kahneman.
Right. And then we're layering on top of that the heavy existential philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, specifically looking at how to evolve beyond our base instincts.
It's basically about understanding the biological traps, the cognitive biases that blind us to those traps, and the profound mindset shifts you need to build a partnership that actually endures.
So where do we start?
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the hardware. You and I and everyone listening are walking around with these modern, highly individualized, conscious brains.
Right. We have mortgages, career ambitions, complex emotional needs.
But these modern brains are housed in bodies running on biological software that, well, hasn't had a major update since we were hunter-gatherers.
Yeah, we're basically running a million-year-old operating system.
So before we can talk about fixing the bugs, we really need to understand the base code. How does this evolutionary blueprint actually operate?
Well, the very first thing we have to do is strip away all of our modern, culturally ingrained notions of romance and fairness.
Which is hard to do.
It's very hard because evolution has absolutely no morals. It has no ethics. It does not care one bit if you feel self-actualized or happy or deeply understood by your partner.
It's just a blind, ruthless process.
Exactly. It optimizes for one single metric, and that is successful replication. Whatever traits or impulses lead to more offspring surviving to have their own offspring.
Those are the traits that get passed down, full stop.
Right. So when evolutionary biologists look at human mating through that incredibly cold, utilitarian lens, what do they see?
Because the authors we're looking at today outline a very specific, historically successful cycle, particularly when looking at female reproductive strategies.
Yes. The literature points to a distinct multi-stage evolutionary program that historically maximized reproductive success. And it's categorized into 3 main phases.
Okay.
First is what we can call the stud phase.
The stud phase. That paints quite a picture. Let's break down the mechanics of that. Why does the cycle start there?
Well, put yourself in the environment of early human evolution. The environment is harsh, it's dangerous, it's unforgiving.
Basically a constant fight for survival.
Right. So in this initial phase, the biological imperative is to secure the absolute best, most robust genetics available. The ancient programming is hypersensitive to physical markers of health, strength, dominance, and social status.
Okay, so the biological goal here is purely fertilization by the strongest possible candidate to ensure the offspring have the strongest immune systems and physical advantages.
Exactly. It's the visceral magnetic attraction phase.
It's the archetype of the bad boy, right? Or the highly dominant, uncompromising leader. Biology is screaming, his genes are top tier for survival.
Yeah, but here's the obvious problem with that. Human babies are practically helpless for years.
Right. They require a staggering amount of caloric resources, time, and physical protection.
A hyperdominant, aggressive stud who is constantly seeking new mates or getting into conflicts isn't exactly the ideal candidate to sit in the cave for 5 years mashing up berries.
No, probably not. So the programming has to pivot, right?
Precisely. The biological needs of the offspring drastically change the required strategy. And this is where the second phase initiates.
The provider phase.
Yes. Post-fertilization, or as the biological clock shifts toward the reality of child-rearing, the female instinct shifts radically.
So what happens to that attraction to the bad boy?
The programming deprioritizes those dangerous stud traits. It heavily prioritizes security, resources, and protection.
The search is now for the reliable, stable, empathetic partner, the guy who will stick around, gather food, build the shelter, and invest long-term.
Exactly, to ensure the offspring reach maturity.
Okay, so the narrative plays out. She bonds with the provider, they settle down, they build a life, they have a child. The child gets past those incredibly vulnerable early years of life, say around 5 to 7 years old.
Right, the child's immune system is stronger, they can walk, eat solid food.
The provider has successfully done his job, and then, well, the system crashes.
Then we hit the third phase. The rejection phase. And this is where the tragedy of modern romance really begins.
The infamous 7-year itch.
The literature notes that this phase typically kicks in around the 7-year mark of a relationship. Think about it biologically.
Okay.
The mission of securing good genes, accomplished. The mission of ensuring the early, critical survival of the offspring, accomplished.
Therefore, the evolutionary contract is fulfilled.
Consequently, the visceral sexual attraction to the provider plummets. Deep, seemingly inexplicable dissatisfaction begins to breed.
Intimacy dries up, and separation very frequently follows. Because the system is rebooting.
Yes.
The ancient software is literally saying, great job, team. Now, to maximize genetic diversity for the species, go find a brand new genetic mix for the next round of offspring.
It's actively trying to fire the provider because his evolutionary utility for that specific cycle has expired.
That is just wild.
Yeah.
But we have to acknowledge that in our ancestral environment, this cycle was brilliantly successful.
Oh, absolutely. Serial monogamy tied to early childhood development ensured genetic diversity. It utilized the resources of multiple partners over a lifetime. It wasn't malicious.
It simply worked for the propagation of the species, but, and this is the crux of the entire issue, we do not live on the ancestral savanna.
No, we do not.
We live in a highly individualized, monogamous society built on laws, 30-year mortgages, shared bank accounts, and, complex emotional expectations.
So we're basically trying to run this erratic, short-term, million-year-old biological cycle inside a modern societal structure that demands lifelong stability.
And the collision between those two things is catastrophic. What the authors of our source material argue is that the modern landscape hasn't just failed to accommodate this biology.
It's actually exacerbated the crash.
Right. Over the last few decades, society has fundamentally restructured the economic and social roles of men and women, which completely throws off the mechanics of that provider phase.
I want to tread carefully here because the authors use some incredibly provocative, frankly polarizing language to describe this modern shift.
Yeah, they talk about the rise of weak men and boss babes. Now, obviously, those are highly charged cultural buzzwords.
And we're not taking sides here. Let's just separate the internet slang from the underlying sociological argument they're trying to make. What is the actual structural shift they're pointing to?
The structural shift is fundamentally economic and cultural. The authors point out that in the modern knowledge-based economy, women have not only equaled, but in many sectors outpaced men in education and earning potential.
So the strict survival-based need for a male provider in the financial and physical sense has drastically diminished. A woman can provide for herself.
Concurrently, societal messaging has heavily pressured men to become entirely empathetic, risk-avoidant, and accommodating.
Which are traits that are excellent for peaceful modern coexistence, but which directly conflict with the ancient biological triggers of the stud phase.
Let me challenge this, though. Is the issue really that men are quote-unquote weak? Or is it that we are demanding men to be two completely contradictory things at exactly the same time?
That is the exact paradox the authors are highlighting. If we connect this to the bigger picture of modern dating, the texts lay out a very stark foundational rule.
What's the rule?
They say, the woman is the gatekeeper of sex. The man is the gatekeeper of commitment.
Okay, let's break that down, because that sounds like a very traditionalist view.
Biologically and historically, because the cost of reproduction is astronomically higher for females, they naturally control access to intimacy and genetic replication.
Men, conversely, control access to long-term exclusivity, provision, and societal security. The commitment.
But today, the risk calculus for that commitment has completely flipped.
Right. In the past, the societal structure, religion, community pressure, lack of economic options, it forced couples to stay together, even when that 7-year reduction phase hit.
But today, if that biological alarm bell rings, a woman has the total economic freedom to leave. She can initiate a divorce, keep the house, take primary custody, and secure a portion of the man's future income.
Which means that for a modern strategic man, opening that gate of commitment represents an almost unimaginable level of risk.
The statistical odds are that he will hit the 7-year biological wall, and the societal penalty for hitting that wall is devastating.
This is why we see a massive demographic of young men simply opting out of the traditional marriage model entirely.
And if a man does decide to take that risk and commit, he has to walk an impossible tightrope.
Oh, absolutely. He has to somehow maintain the dominant, unshakable polarity that his partner's ancient biology, that stud phase programming, secretly craves to maintain physical attraction.
But simultaneously, he has to be the endlessly supportive, vulnerable, egalitarian partner that modern society demands.
If he leans too far into being the nice guy, he triggers her rejection phase prematurely because he lacks polarity.
And if he leans too far into the dominant archetype, he violates modern norms and risks being labeled toxic. It's a no-win scenario.
It is exhausting just to analyze it, but this raises an important question. If our biology is programming us to hit a wall, and society has made the consequences of hitting that wall so severe, why don't we just see it happening and rationally stop it?
Yeah, if I know the 7-year itch is just a hormone drop, why can't I just say, oh, my oxytocin levels are low today, I still love my husband? Why does it destroy marriages?
Because our brains are incredibly adept at deceiving us. We do not experience biological shifts as biological shifts. We experience them as objective reality.
When the rejection phase hits, we don't realize we're following an ancient script.
Our brains actively convince us that we are acting purely rationally based on our partner's flaws. And this leads us directly into what the authors call the most dangerous cognitive trap in relationships.
Inverse meta-cognition.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Inverse meta-cognition. Now, meta-cognition in basic psychology is thinking about your own thinking. It's the ability to observe your own biases.
Right.
So what exactly makes it inverse?
Inverse metacognition occurs when a person is deeply, fundamentally convinced they are highly self-aware, highly critical, and free of bias.
Okay.
But that exact rigid belief makes them completely incapable of actual reflection. They use their carefully curated self-image as an enlightened, emotionally intelligent partner as an impenetrable shield against any uncomfortable truths.
Oh, man, I have seen this play out so many times. It's like wearing armor made entirely out of your own ego.
It really is. You tell yourself, I've been to therapy, I read psychology books, I am a very self-reflective person.
And because you've accepted that as your identity, the second your partner points out a blind spot, say, that you are being distant or unfair, you don't actually reflect on it, you deflect it.
You think, well, I am objectively self-aware. Therefore, if they're accusing me of a flaw I haven't identified, their perception must be wrong. They're gaslighting me.
That is the exact mechanism.
Yeah.
And to understand how the brain constructs this false reality, the authors lean heavily on the work of Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman.
Specifically, his division of the brain into System 1 and System 2 thinking.
Right. For those who haven't read Thinking Fast and Slow, System 1 is our fast, intuitive, emotional, automatic brain. It's the amygdala firing.
And System 2 is the slow, deliberate, logical prefrontal cortex. It requires a lot of caloric energy to use.
Exactly. Now, how does this apply to an argument? When a biological shift happens, let's say the drop in bonding hormones during the rejection phase, System 1 immediately registers a feeling of profound dissatisfaction.
It generates a fast emotional narrative, like, I am unhappy, my partner is ignoring my needs, they are boring.
Now, ideally, System 2 is supposed to be the judge. It's supposed to wake up, look at System 1's emotional outburst, and critically analyze it.
It should say, hold on, is that actually true? Is he boring, or have we just been together a long time? Am I misinterpreting this feeling?
But the brain hates doing that. The brain hates cognitive dissonance. Holding two conflicting ideas at once takes too much energy.
So instead of acting like an impartial judge, System 2 acts like a highly paid defense attorney.
Oh, that is a brilliant analogy. The defense attorney doesn't care about the truth. The defense attorney only cares about justifying the client's actions.
Exactly. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt calls this post hoc rationalization. System 1 makes the emotional judgment instantly. Then, System 2 scrambles to comb through the last 5 years of the relationship to find evidence that proves the emotional judgment was objectively correct.
And if you suffer from inverse metacognition, your defense attorney is utterly ruthless.
Because your identity is I'm a rational, self-aware person, your brain cannot accept the idea that you are just experiencing a primitive hormonal fluctuation.
It has to be real. It has to be your partner's fault. So let's tie this directly back to that 7-year biological cliff. Imagine a couple hitting year 7.
Okay.
The biological dissatisfaction kicks in. The partner experiencing this drop in attraction doesn't wake up and think, my evolutionary hardware is trying to diversify my genetics because our toddler's immune system is now robust.
No, because inverse metacognition won't allow it. Her System 1 feels the coldness, the annoyance.
Her System 2 immediately builds a massive, rational-sounding narrative to justify pulling away. She convinces herself, my partner has objectively failed me. He doesn't listen to me the way he used to. He lacks ambition. We've just grown apart.
The biological sensor goes off, but the brain misinterprets the data entirely. The dissatisfaction is real, but the cause the brain assigns to it is an absolute illusion created by the ego to justify the evolutionary urge to separate.
And if the husband tries to say, hey, I think we were just in a rut, I think you were pulling away for no reason, she will use her self-awareness to annihilate him.
She'll say, I've done the work, I know my truth, and the objective reality that you are the problem.
As Nietzsche famously warned, the most dangerous enemy of truth isn't the liar. It is the one who considers themselves the supreme lover of truth.
It's a terrifying cognitive trap.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the ultimate question for the relationship strategist.
Right.
If our biology is actively trying to tear us apart, and our brains are neurologically wired to trick us into thinking it's our partner's fault, are we just doomed? Is long-term monogamy just a statistical impossibility disguised as a romantic ideal?
It sounds incredibly bleak. If I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, why even bother? But the authors absolutely do not leave us in the dark here.
They argue there is a path forward, but it is not for the faint of heart.
No, it requires to really understand what that looks like, the texts provide a fascinating analytical matrix. They break down all modern relationships into 4 distinct couple constellations, and they evaluate the success prospects of each.
This is where the strategy really begins. Let's analyze these constellations. I want to walk through each one.
Okay, the first constellation is the absolute default. It's the non-Überman partnered with the non-Überfrau, the average man and the average woman operating normally in society.
This is the baseline, and statistically, it is a disaster. The authors argue this is the most unstable constellation with the highest divorce rates.
Why is that?
Because these are 2 people blindly colliding based on their evolutionary instincts. They are completely ignorant of the biological hardware running in the background, and they are hopelessly trapped in inverse metacognition.
When the 7-year itch hits, they don't see it for what it is.
They blow up the relationship, they bitterly blame each other, they destroy their shared assets, and they go out and restart the exact same cycle with someone else, genuinely believing that this time they found their true soulmate.
Spoiler alert for everyone listening, the biology doesn't care who your soulmate is. The cycle will repeat.
Okay, let's look at constellation 2. The Überfrau with the non-Übermann. A highly conscious, intellectually developed woman partnered with an average guy.
The prognosis here is also poor long-term. In this scenario, the Überfrau has done the work. She has achieved a level of metacognition, but she is still housed in a biological body.
If her partner is a non-Überman, meaning he lacks strategic depth, he is completely reactionary, or he is fully bought into the modern, soft, societal expectation without retaining any of his natural masculine polarity, She will inevitably become dissatisfied.
She will intellectually and spiritually outgrow him, and the biological lack of attraction will compound the intellectual disconnect.
It's a fundamental mismatch. Which brings us to Constellation 3, which is fascinating. The Überman with the non-Überfrau.
The highly conscious man who sees the matrix, partnered with an average woman who is still entirely driven by her biology.
This one can work medium term, but it extracts a massive toll on the man. He understands the evolutionary cycles. Therefore, to keep the relationship stable, he has to be highly strategic every single day.
He has to consciously override his own biological urges for genetic variety.
But more exhaustingly, he must actively, continuously work to manage her biology. He has to artificially maintain that stud polarity.
He has to intentionally create tension, remain slightly mysterious, and demonstrate high dominance just to prevent her ancient hardware from slipping into the rejection phase.
It's a relentless game of psychological chess, and it requires massive sustained energy.
It sounds like managing a crisis that never actually resolves. You are constantly bailing water out of a leaky boat. Which brings us to the final, the rarest, and the ideal constellation.
The Überman partnered with the Überfrau.
This is the pinnacle. It is the most stable, most fulfilling dynamic possible. Both partners consciously see the biological strings attached to their limbs, and they mutually agree to cut them.
They are no longer slaves to the million-year-old hardware. Because they manage their own instincts, they can drop the manipulative chess games.
This allows for profound, authentic vulnerability and connection, while they still consciously cultivate the natural polarity required for physical attraction.
I really want to focus on the concept of the Überfrau here, because it is the core mechanism the text focuses on for disrupting that 7-year cycle.
What does it actually look like in practice to be an Überfrau? Because I think there's a huge, dangerous misconception here.
People hear superwoman, who masters her emotions, and they think of a cold, hyper-rational, hyper-masculinized boss babe who just shuts down her feelings and focuses on her career.
The authors are explicit about this. That is a complete misinterpretation. Becoming an Überfrau does not mean denying her femininity or adopting a toxic, hyper-masculine shell.
That is just substituting an evolutionary trap for a modern societal trap. Becoming an Überfrau means achieving radical, unshakable meta-cognition.
It means experiencing the absolute full depth of her emotions, her biological impulses, and her hormonal shifts, but possessing the sovereign mental strength to refuse to let those impulses blindly dictate her actions.
Let's make this incredibly concrete. I want to build a scenario right out of the text. Imagine an Überfrau at year 7 of a marriage.
Okay, so they have a house. They have a 5-year-old child. The provider phase has done its job beautifully. The kid is healthy and safe.
Suddenly, she wakes up one morning and she feels it. That biological drop in attraction toward her husband. The visceral spark is just gone.
Suddenly, the way he breathes is annoying. His jokes aren't funny. The rejection phase is knocking loudly on the door.
Now, let's contrast the reactions. If she were a non-Überfrau, she would instantly fall into inverse metacognition. Her system, too, would build the defense case.
She would start nurgled. That's a great German concept for constant low-level nagging and fault-finding.
She would manufacture chaos out of nothing to justify her feelings. She would convince herself her husband is a failure, destroy the family structure, and seek a new stud to restart the cycle.
But our Überfrau in this scenario, her body's doing the exact same thing. Her hormones are dropping just as fast. She feels the exact same annoyance.
But her prefrontal cortex, her actual conscious self, overrides it.
Exactly.
She deploys radical metacognition.
She observes her own dissatisfaction as if she were a scientist looking at a petri dish.
She says to herself, there it is, right on schedule, the 7-year biological shift. My ancient hardware is telling me to fire my partner because our child's immune system is strong.
She feels the impulse fully, but she absolutely refuses to be a passenger to it. She refuses the post hoc rationalization.
She doesn't spin a narrative about her husband being a bad guy. She recognizes the biological data for what it is, obsolete survival programming.
And then she makes a slow, conscious System 2 decision. She looks at her life, the depth of history she shares with this man, the stability of her family, the psychological well-being of her child.
And she actively, defiantly chooses him anyway. She is creating a life of conscious design, not biological default.
And if we step back, this reveals a profound philosophical choice that the authors pose regarding the fundamental paths we take in life. Once you see these evolutionary cycles, you can't unsee them.
You have to make a strategic decision about how to live. Let's look at the male path the authors outline.
The default path for a man is to blindly follow the romantic ideal. Marry young, assume it will be easy, inevitably hit the 7-year biological wall, get blindsided by a divorce, lose half his assets.
Find a new partner, deal with the immense stress of a blended family, have more kids, and risk hitting the exact same wall again at age 45.
The authors suggest a highly strategic, almost stoic alternative for the modern man. They suggest it is vastly superior to remain single and strictly uncommitted until at least age 30.
During that decade, he focuses entirely on building his moats, his emotional intelligence, his professional skills, his financial independence, and his deep understanding of female biological nature.
Then, fully aware of the risks, he consciously enters a relationship, has his children, and prepares himself for the inevitable biological shift.
Whether he stays single after that or navigates a highly conscious relationship with an Überfrau, he does so from a position of total sovereignty, not naivety.
And for the woman, the existential choice is equally stark. She has to ask herself, is the endless, chaotic cycle of the stud, the provider, and the inevitable rejection actually fulfilling?
Or is it better to do the grueling, painful psychological work to strip away her ego, become an Überfrau, and achieve a profound, conscious, long-term bond that transcends her DNA?
The pinnacle of human connection is two people who see the matrix and choose to build a reality outside of it together.
But here is the catch. Even if you manage to find that perfect constellation, an Überman and an Überfrau life is not a sterile laboratory.
Right. It is going to throw absolute chaos at you. Businesses will go bankrupt, parents will get sick, children will struggle, and you will both change as individuals over decades.
Exactly. You can't just logic your way out of a tragedy.
Yeah.
To survive the inevitable crushing hardships of a 50-year partnership, you need a mechanism to handle profound, unavoidable dissatisfaction without letting it blow up the foundation.
And the source materials introduce a concept that I think is the most powerful tool in this entire deep dive. It's an ancient Stoic concept, heavily popularized by Nietzsche.
You are referring to Amor Fati, the love of one's fate.
Now, I really want to define this carefully because when people hear love your fate, they think of passive resignation. They think of gritting your teeth, staring at a miserable situation and just saying, well, I guess this is my life now.
That is not Amor Fati.
Right.
Amor Fati is looking at your life, the pain, the joy, the sickness, the health, the boredom, the chaos, and saying a joyful, resounding yes to all of it.
It's saying, I want it exactly as it is and no different for all eternity.
To understand why this specific philosophical stance is the ultimate antidote to relationship failure, we have to look at how systems theory applies to marriage. The authors explicitly state that a long-term relationship is not a simple linear equation where good communication equals happiness.
No, a relationship is a highly complex, recursive system. One author literally describes it as a relativity theory on steroids.
I love that phrase, a relativity theory on steroids. Let's break that down. A simple system is fixing a bicycle chain. You put the chain on, the wheel turns.
A complex, recursive system is a living ecosystem. Everything you do affects your partner. That changes their mood, which changes how they react to you 3 days later, which changes how you feel about them next week.
It is an infinite, unpredictable feedback loop with massive time delays.
Precisely. And if we look at how humans operate in any system, dissatisfaction is our primary biological sensor and actuator. It is the mechanism that drives change.
If your body temperature drops, the sensor registers dissatisfaction. You feel cold, which actuates a response. You put on a sweater.
That works great for biology. But if you apply that simple sensor and actuator logic to a highly complex, recursive system like a marriage, you will destroy it. Think about it.
You feel a slight biological drop in attraction at year 7. Your sensor registers dissatisfaction.
If you blindly act on that to fix it, maybe you start an argument to create drama, or you seek validation outside the marriage, you aren't putting on a sweater. You are throwing a wrench into a jet engine.
You create unpredictable side effects that trap you in an endless cycle of fighting, fixing, and failing. It's like trying to fix a Swiss watch with a hammer. You just break more gears.
This is where the authors introduce a brilliant visualization to explain how Amor Fati neutralizes this problem. They call it the rubber band model.
Imagine you and your partner have a North Star. This represents your deepest, most conscious alignment, your shared values, your commitment to your family's stability.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You are attached to this North Star by a thick rubber band. As you move through the reality of a decades-long life, you're going to drift. You face financial stress or you hit the rejection phase and you wander away from that North Star.
And as you do, the rubber band pulls tight. It creates tension. That tension is the feeling of dissatisfaction.
And the normal human reaction is to panic. We feel that tension, and our inverse meta-cognition kicks in. We think, this tension is awful, my partner is making me miserable, the only way to stop the pain is to cut the band and leave.
But Amor Fati fundamentally alters your relationship with that tension. When you practice Amor Fati, you stop experiencing that tension as an objective sign of failure or a heavy, unbearable burden.
Instead, you view the tension as friendly, necessary guidance. You feel the pull, you acknowledge the dissatisfaction fully, but you say a joyful yes to it.
You stop frantically fighting the reality of the relationship's complexity, and you learn to exist within the tension.
Let's apply this to a real crisis. Say a major financial blow hits the family, and the stress is causing huge distance between a couple.
The partner practicing Amor Fati doesn't pretend everything is fine. They feel the immense disconnect. But they no longer experience that disconnect as crippling. They don't panic.
They free themselves from the biological urge to lash out or run away. They accept that they cannot perfectly control the recursive system of the marriage.
But they look at their partner in all the messiness and they say a joyful yes to the shared journey regardless.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of behavioral science, Amor Fati is the ultimate circuit breaker. It overcomes relationship instability because it shatters the panic reaction loop.
You recognize a problem, but because you have accepted the chaos as part of the beauty of the system, you don't immediately react out of fear or anger.
You wait, you observe, and you intervene only at the truly decisive points, rather than fighting every single minor fluctuation in the system.
Okay, I have to push back here because I know what the critics are screaming right now. I can hear people listening to this and thinking, saying a joyful yes to dissatisfaction, that is just a pseudo-intellectual way of telling people to settle for less.
It sounds like giving people permission to stay in mediocre, loveless marriages and pretend it's philosophical enlightenment.
Exactly.
It is a vital critique, and the authors absolutely do not shy away from it. They make a profound distinction between Amor Fati and settling.
Settling is passive resignation. It's giving up.
The authors explicitly link passive resignation to what Nietzsche called slave morality, or paralyzing pity. If you stay in a marriage because you are too financially weak to leave, because you are terrified of dying alone, or because you just pity your partner,
that is not Amor Fati. That is cowardice disguised as loyalty. So settling is driven fundamentally by fear and weakness.
Precisely. Amor Fati requires the exact opposite. It requires extreme radical strength. It is an active, sovereign embrace of reality.
You aren't staying because you are trapped. You are staying because you actively, joyfully choose to master the complexity.
You aren't fighting every minor battle because you are weak. You aren't fighting them because you're standing in the dead center of the storm, completely sovereign, accepting the chaos as the necessary price of a deep, enduring human connection.
I love that. It's the difference between being a victim of the ocean and being a surfer. The victim is battered by the waves, terrified, and just resigns themselves to drowning.
The surfer sees the exact same terrifying, chaotic waves, says yes to them, and uses their strength and skill to ride them. Amor Fati is learning to surf the recursive, complex system of a lifelong relationship.
A perfect metaphor. Now, this is all incredibly profound, high-level philosophy. But how does this translate to Tuesday night in the kitchen? We've talked about the evolutionary traps, the danger of inverse metacognition, the Überfrau overcoming her biology, and the mindset of Amor Fati. Let's make this actionable.
Let's build the ultimate strategist's checklist for achieving metacognitive love, drawing directly from the practical solutions provided in the sources.
Let's do it. For everyone listening, if you want to outsmart your biology, this is your daily playbook. Let's go through these one by one. The first item on the checklist is adopting a concept the texts call WAF.
WAF stands for Waarheid als Fundament, Truth as Foundation.
Truth as foundation. What does this actually require of us when we are in the middle of a heated argument about, say, how to discipline the kids?
It requires a complete, terrifying death of the ego. Normally, when we argue, our ego is entirely tied to being right. We want to win the argument because losing feels like an attack on our identity.
Adopting WAF means you must consciously uncouple your ego from being right. Your core identity must shift to being the active, relentless seeker of objective truth.
So in a fight, the goal isn't to defeat your partner. The goal is to collaborate with them to uncover the objective reality of the situation, even if, especially that reality proves that you are completely, embarrassingly wrong.
You have to love the truth more than you love your own self-image, which is incredibly painful, which is why it leads directly to the second item on the checklist, practicing radical self-doubt.
The author suggests this shouldn't just be something you do when you fight. It needs to be a daily, active habit.
How do you do that without just making yourself insecure and neurotic?
By framing it scientifically,
Mm.
you must regularly, systematically ask yourself, where could I be most thoroughly mistaken about my partner or my own feelings right now?
It is the active countermeasure to inverse metacognition. Instead of assuming your feelings of annoyance or anger are objective facts, you treat them as highly suspicious data points that need to be audited.
And how do we act in the world while constantly doubting ourselves? That brings us to item 3, Ta.
Temporary absolute Wahrheit, temporary absolute truth.
I love this one because it translates perfectly to a great Silicon Valley mental model. Strong opinions, loosely held.
Yes, you cannot live your life paralyzed by radical self-doubt. You must commit fully to your relationship. You must make parenting decisions. You must act with conviction based on your current, best understanding of the truth.
But, and this is the operative mechanism, the absolute second new evidence arises, you must update your stance immediately.
So let's say you are furious because you are convinced your partner is ignoring you on purpose. That is your temporary absolute truth, and you address it with them. But during the conversation, you use radical self-doubt.
And you realize, wait, I'm just incredibly stressed from work and projecting my anxiety onto them.
Yeah.
The second you see that new evidence, you drop your old narrative instantly.
You update your mental model without getting defensive, without feeling like you lost the fight. You just pivot to the new truth.
Because your foundation is the truth. TWAF, not your ego. Now, item 4 is a practical, almost clinical exercise for forcing your brain to do this, the pre-mortem method.
This is borrowed directly from Daniel Kahneman's corporate consulting work. In business, before you launch a product, you imagine it failed miserably, and you work backward to figure out what killed it. How do we apply a pre-mortem to a marriage?
You apply it right in the middle of a conflict. Let's say you are deadlocked in an argument about finances. You stop. You force your brain to assume, as a hypothetical fact, that your current stance is 100% wrong and your partner is 100% right.
And then you actively force your system to logic to search for the reasons why that might be the case.
Wow! Assume I am the idiot here. Why am I the idiot?
Ah.
It completely short-circuits the defense attorney in your brain. It forces your logic to work for your partner instead of against them.
Exactly. And item 5 goes hand in hand with that, steel manning.
Most of us are very familiar with straw manning. That's when you take your partner's argument, twist it into something ridiculous, and attack that.
If your partner says, "I wish you would help with the dishes," a straw man response is, "Oh, so you're saying I'm a lazy slub who does nothing for this family." It's a dishonest debate tactic. Steel manning is the absolute inverse.
Before you are allowed to criticize or respond to your partner's position, you must articulate the strongest, most reasonable, most charitable version of their argument.
You have to explain their perspective back to them so clearly and with such empathy that they look at you and say, "Yes, exactly, that is exactly what I mean." Only once they agree that you fully understand their position are you allowed to counter it.
I genuinely believe if couples mandated steel manning in their homes, 90% of divorces would vanish. Most arguments are just two people screaming because neither feels heard. If you prove you hear them, the anger dissipates.
And finally, item 6 on the checklist, phase recognition.
This brings us full circle to the biology. You must regularly audit the timeline of your relationship. Are you approaching the 7-year mark?
Are you transitioning from the intense physical needs of the provider phase to the biological obsolescence of the rejection phase? If you suddenly feel an inexplicable drop in attraction or a surge in boredom and dissatisfaction, recognize it.
It's just a check engine light. It is not an objective, cosmic truth about your partner's lack of worth. It is literally just your million-year-old hardware running a background program to diversify your genes.
You see the prompt on the screen, but you don't have to click execute.
If we connect this entire checklist to the bigger picture, it becomes clear that this isn't just a list of cute communication hacks to save a marriage. This is a rigorous, demanding methodology for achieving Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming.
You aren't just conquering your relationship problems. You are systematically conquering your own biology. You are stepping outside the matrix of human evolutionary programming.
Which is the ultimate, truest definition of becoming the Überman or the Überfrau.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap the incredible, heavy journey we've just been on. We started by looking under the hood and decoding the ancient biological cycles, the stud phase, the provider phase, and the destructive rejection phase that are actively trying to dictate our love lives.
And force us into endless, chaotic loops of reproduction and separation.
They exposed the incredibly insidious cognitive trap of inverse metacognition, showing how our own illusion of self-awareness actually blinds us to our biological biases.
Causing us to cruelly blame our partners for our own hormonal shifts.
We analyzed the couple constellations and realized that the only truly stable path forward is the mutual evolution into the Übermann and Überfrau sovereign individuals who absolutely refuse to be slaves to their DNA.
We explored how the radical, joyful acceptance of Amor Fati allows us to surf the chaotic, recursive system of a lifelong relationship without drowning in dissatisfaction.
And finally, we outlined the strategist's ultimate checklist: adopting truth as a foundation, practicing radical self-doubt, utilizing temporary absolute truth, running pre-mortems on our arguments, steel-manning our partners, and practicing objective phase recognition, a true blueprint for metacognitive love.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means you have a choice. You are no longer a passive passenger to your DNA.
You do not have to be a blind statistic of the 7-year itch. You now have the strategic playbook to build a relationship that defies evolutionary statistics. You can run custom conscious software on that ancient hardware.
But we have to be honest. Executing this playbook requires a level of personal sovereignty, independence, and emotional strength that most people are, quite frankly, terrified of.
And this brings us to a final, very provocative thought from the source materials regarding how to truly achieve that necessary independence.
Yes, the texts end by comparing two very different philosophical models for living a free, unburdened life. The ancient philosopher Diogenes versus what they call the modern moat builder.
Diogenes was the infamous Greek philosopher who lived in a literal clay barrel in the marketplace of Athens. He achieved ultimate freedom through radical, absolute minimalism.
He owned nothing, he sought no social status, and he avoided deep human relationships entirely. His logic was simple. Because he had nothing to lose, no one could take anything from him.
He was completely unblackmailable by society. He was free.
But the authors point out a massive, fatal flaw in the Diogenes model. He had no skin in the game. He removed himself entirely from the complexity, the beauty, and the risk of human life.
Look, it's easy to be peaceful and enlightened when you live in a barrel and interact with no one, but that's not a full human experience. It's a retreat. It's hiding.
Exactly. The ultimate relationship strategist, the true Übermensch, according to the text, takes the exact opposite approach. They are the moat builder.
Instead of stripping their life down to nothing, they build massive, impenetrable moats of diversification around their life. They build multiple options, highly diverse skill sets, absolute independent financial stability, and a strong, unshakable, independent identity that does not rely on their partner for validation.
They don't retreat from the world. They build total redundancy within it. And how does this apply to love?
It means you can stand completely inside the messy, beautiful, chaotic, recursive world of a relationship. You can be fully committed, fully vulnerable, and have total, terrifying skin in the game. But because you have built those moats, because you have cultivated that immense inner sovereignty and independence, you are never trapped by fear.
Because you are not desperately, existentially dependent on the relationship for your survival or your identity, you always have the power to speak the absolute truth even when it's uncomfortable.
You don't have to employ inverse metacognition to protect a fragile ego, and you don't have to suppress your actual feelings or bite your tongue just to keep the peace.
You are truly, profoundly free within the relationship, not by running away from it.
You can look at the murky, chaotic landscape of human emotion and biology, and you don't need it to be clean and binary anymore. You don't need a perfectly clear, romanticized picture because you know how to navigate the mud.
You finally understand that the 7-year biological alarm bell isn't a mandate to fire your partner. It's just an invitation to finally start choosing them, consciously, deliberately, every single day.
It is the ultimate, beautiful triumph of the conscious mind over the biological machine.
So true.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take this checklist. Look at your own relationship timeline. Apply WAF tonight. Start building your moats tomorrow. And we'll see you next time.